expected. The Lord has given this man as a gift, as a seed form, and if the church does not pray, the crooked way that's inside of him, the tendency, the potential for him to falter and to fall back on things that he promised that he would do, we're in great danger of this. So I want to put that out there.
So that the full statement from President Trump in the immediate aftermath of that missile launch. Former British ambassador to Syria, Peter Ford, is with me now. Very good morning to you.
Good morning.
Can I just draw your attention first to the opening part of that statement from President Trump? He said, "My fellow Americans, on Tuesday, Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad launched a horrible chemical weapons attack on innocent civilians." It's a statement of fact.
It's a statement, a misstatement of non-fact. We don't know. What's needed is an investigation, because there are two possibilities for what happened. One is the American version, that Assad dropped chemical weapons on this locality. The other version is that an ordinary bomb was dropped and it hit a munitions dump. The jihadis were storing chemical weapons. We don't know which of these two possibilities is the correct one. Remember the run-up to Iraq. The experts, the intelligence agencies, the politicians were convinced that Saddam had weapons of mass destruction. They produced reams of evidence, photographs, diagrams. It was all wrong. It was all wrong. It's possible that they're wrong in this instance as well, that they are just looking for a pretext to attack Syria. And let's not deceive ourselves. What has happened makes more use of chemical weapons more likely, not less.
Well, the sentiment that you're talking about there chimes most amongst international reaction to what happened, the chemical attack, with what Russia is saying. You chime most with them. We heard from Michael Fallon, the Defense Secretary. He is convinced by the evidence sufficient that he backs this action. Why is it then that you are, if you like, a relatively lone voice?
I don't leave my brains at the door when I examine a situation analytically. I try to be objective, and based on previous experience, including Iraq, we can see that we cannot take at face value what the so-called intelligence experts tell us, not when they have an agenda. But come back to the main point. It's not going to end here, and we are likely, Britain, to be dragged into it, because Trump has just given the jihadis 1,000 reasons to stage fake flag operations, seeing how successful and how easy it is with a gullible media to provoke the West into intemperate reactions. They will very likely stage an operation similar to what they did, and this was documented by the United Nations in August last year. They mounted a chlorine gas attack on civilians, and they tried to make it look like it was a regime operation. This, mark my words, you're hearing it here, and it will happen, and we'll get all the warmongers coming to tell us that Assad is defying us and we must go in more heavily into Syria. This will be fake flag.
If I can just ask you, your expertise, you're a former, it's worth saying, a former British ambassador to Syria. With your knowledge of Bashar al-Assad and his regime, that country, what do you think his reaction to this will be?
Assad may be cruel, brutal, but he's not mad. It defies belief that he would bring this all on his head for no military advantage. The site that was hit had no military significance. It made absolutely no sense.
Well, in a way, we're going back to the previous argument. My question is more about what happens.
He would have angered the Russians for no other reason. This is simply not plausible.
But how will his behavior change? Now he knows President Trump is prepared to launch cruise missile attacks.
But he probably didn't do it in the first place, so it can't change his behavior if he didn't do it in the first place. But we will all pay the consequences. The oil price will spike. Very likely there will be more use, not less use, of CW as a result of this. And, this is also important, the Russians and the Syrians will give less cooperation in the fight against ISIS.
Okay. Peter Ford, thank you very much for coming in for us this morning. Peter Ford is a
Thanks for
former British ambassador to Syria.
There's a man with a gun over there, telling me I got to beware. I think it's time we stop, children. What's that sound? Everybody look what's going down.
This is the Savage Nation. I am the only person in the American media with a science background. I intend to approach today's program as though this is a jury trial, and I hope that you, the listeners, will be the jury. My postulate is quite simple. Want to hear it? Because you're going to hear it. This was not sarin gas, number one. It looks like phosgene gas. I realize those are big words for those in the media who are ready to put on military uniforms on their radio and television shows. This was a complete false flag event, and I'll give you some evidence, and you decide for yourself whether this thing is a fake or not. First of all, let's start from the beginning. Was this a strategic move that had the approval of Congress, approval of the UN? Were any U.S. interests threatened by Assad? Assad was fighting ISIS, for God's sakes. He had ISIS on the run with the help of Russia. What happened? Who just won? Why, we just helped ISIS. Isn't that what McCain and Lindsey Graham are celebrating? So we've just turned 180 degrees. Bannon was out, Kushner was in, and all of a sudden the strike was launched. I told that to you yesterday. This was a military tweet by Donald Trump. Quote me. President, known as a tweeter. This was a military tweet. Has he thought about what the next tweet might be? He better, because there's got to be another one very soon. I mean, really, what did he do militarily? It was actually a weak strike when you think about it. If he really wanted to take out Assad, wouldn't he have struck Damascus and killed Assad with a heavier weapon? I mean, think about this. This was a limp-wristed attack in order to gain the attention of the fools in the media and the fools amongst the so-called Republican voters who think this was a real great military action. So let me go back to my main contention here. This was not even a sarin gas attack. That's aside from the fact that Assad, who has been accused of gassing his own people, had nothing to gain by gassing his own people. Let's assume that you are in the camp that bought hook, line, and sinker the big lie that Assad would gas his own people with sarin gas. Now, what would Assad have gained by doing that? Is he stupid? Is he that stupid not to have figured out what would happen a day later? So why would he do it? He was winning. Was he losing? Was he desperate? Was Assad desperate enough to use sarin on children? Of course not. But there's no logic in America. There are just robots, RNCers, neocons pretending to be conservatives. Let me give you some evidence and you decide for yourself. Because this military tweet by President Trump is an embarrassment. It was not a strategic move. Has he thought about what follows? McCain is glowing over this. What does that tell you? The Soros globalist cabal has now won. Trump is doing their bidding. Isn't this what we told Hillary we didn't want her to do? Isn't this why we voted for Trump? Isn't this why I sacrificed the year of my life to work to get Trump elected? Isn't this why I wrote Trump's War? There's a whole chapter in Trump's War that is entitled Trump's War Against the War Machine. That is a heck of a chapter. Trump's War Against the War Machine, Chapter 7. I warned about the liberal warmongers. I warned about the neocons. I warned about the war profiteers. I warned you that this might happen. And moreover, yesterday on this show, right here on the airwaves, I warned you this was coming. I said I'd be surprised if there was no military action by Friday night. Well, unfortunately, I was right. My evidence will be presented to you, and you, the jury, are going to decide. I'm Clarence Darrow for the prosecution that this is a gigantic false flag, gigantic lie. It's a wag the dog scenario. It's what Bill Clinton did. It's what they all do when they get into trouble and their poll numbers are low, by the way. I said it to you yesterday, so I'll repeat it again today. He was in a corner. He was hated by everyone except people like me who supported him. Did you hear what I just said? So he thought that by appeasing the warmongering crowd, the McCain military-industrial complex, they would come to love him. Now, of course, the idiots in the media don't know what to do. They're just sheeple. Even the great Rush Limbaugh was saying, I couldn't believe what I heard. Pardon me. I listened to the great Rush Limbaugh who said, well, Assad's been gassing his people for 7 straight years. Where'd that come from? Where'd Rush get that information from? I guess it came directly over the transom from the RNC. This is getting sicker by the day. It was a false flag. McCain wanted it to happen. They've been screaming to bomb Assad for years. Lindsey the sicko Graham wanted it to happen. Pelosi the warmonger wanted it to happen. Schumer the warmonger. CNN all wanted the bombing of Assad. Now you know you're on the wrong side if that cesspool of filth supports your actions. This whole thing stinks to high heaven. Hours before the airstrikes, we learned that Hillary Clinton called for the bombing of Syrian airfields. Did you know that? So it looks like Hillary won. It looks as though the Hillary deep state wing won, and Trump is now basically doing their bidding. But to the evidence now, the evidence that only I can present because of my background in phytochemistry. Very simple. Was it sarin gas to begin with? Well, I don't know. I'm a genius. I don't know what it was. What do I know? He gassed his own people. What's the difference? Well, it's a big difference because you bought it hook, line, and sinker. You want to hear why I don't think it was sarin gas, but probably phosgene, a chlorine-based gas? It's very simple. Phosgene is a choking agent. It's derived from chlorine. It is not a nerve agent. There's a big difference here. If you look at the videos and the stories, you'll see that my allegation or my suspicion may be correct because the first responders would have all died if it was nerve gas. You didn't know that. I guess you didn't learn that on MSNBC or CNN. If it had been a nerve gas, as most of you fools think it was, those of you who are saluting all of a sudden, you became warmongers overnight. I thought that Trump was a man of peace who was not going to lead us to war. I thought Trump was the man who was going to reach out to Putin and become his friend. That's why I worked so hard to stop the war against Russia. Boy, was I wrong. Did they turn this guy? Bannon was out, the son-in-law was in, and the next day there was a bombing attack. A little impotent bombing attack. A military tweet is what it was. That's all it was, a military tweet. This wasn't a real attack on Assad. They wanted Assad out. You would have taken him out in Damascus. It was nothing. It was Clinton bombing an aspirin factory. But you're all cheering. Think about what that means about you, all you cheerleaders out there for the war. So now let's go back to this allegation that it was not even sarin gas. Yesterday we were watching some of the videos that were coming out. And a friend of mine was tweeting me, actually emailing me, and saying, wait a minute. A person's clothing can release sarin after it has come in contact with sarin vapor, which can lead to exposure of other people. That was number one. I thought that was really interesting. Then another one came on later saying, if it's sarin, why no gloves? And the individual said, yeah, there were other photos showing them taking samples of the toxin wearing sandals. Again, made no sense. Following the logic, or have you lost? You can't follow me because your mind went blank? Well, I'll keep going anyway. This is called logic scientific method. This is called deductive analysis. This is what anyone would do who really wanted to get to the bottom of this big lie. Okay? I question the narrative that it was sarin gas, number one, as I question the idea that it was even Assad who did it. That's the big picture. Why would he do it, you morons, you? You stupid people out there who are buying this hook, line, and sinker. I go to the Drudge Report. There's a poll. Approve, disapprove. I knew what it would be. I mean, it's stupid. I know what this is going to be. Drudge poll. Trump strikes Assad. Good, bad. I knew that I'd be in the minority. 66% of the fools who voted said it's a good thing. Now, if Obama had done it, it would have been a bad thing. But because Trump did it, it's a good thing. I'm a Trump bot now. I'm just a little robot. Whatever he does is good. He's smarter than everybody. Only 20% of you were smart enough to know how bad this was. So anyway, I know I'm a minority. The smart move would be to support it. The smart move would be to support the president no matter what he does, but that would make me worthless to you. I may as well quit if I did that. I may as well retire if I just supported him no matter what he did. I'm not going to do that. I have an obligation to my listeners to go where the truth lies. And I know where the chips will fall on this. It's not very good. I know most of you are not going to follow me. You're going to follow the lie. Most of you are going to continue to believe that it was a good thing, that Assad did it and he gassed his own people, and that Trump is a genius. Good for you. Well, goody for you. The globalist cabal has won. The McCain cabal has won. How is this an America First decision? To engage in a conflict between two enemies of the United States. How does that match the campaign of America First, no foreign wars? How does that create one job in Ohio, one job in Pennsylvania? Where are the jobs? Savage says no war. It's linked up on the top of Drudge. I was pleased to see that. Didn't think anybody would notice. Because I went on the air yesterday and my show was entitled, I Am a Conservative Peacenik. Do you want war with Russia? Just read it. I'm not going to read it to you. And I'll go back again to the evidence I was trying to present to you, that not only would it make no sense for Assad to have gassed his own people, if you still have any logic left in your brain, because look what happened right after. The world turned on him. Right? The world turned on him. Why would he do it? Is he stupid? Is Russia dumb? Oh, I see. Wait a minute. Let me follow your genius minds. All of you think that Assad did this to his own people. Let's see. Now, Russia is stupid. The other day you were saying that the KGB head of Russia is the smartest man on earth, very cagey, anti-American, ran the KGB for many years, and that Putin is so smart and so evil. So that smart, evil man would have had his puppet Assad gas his own people, not having thought the next step out. Let me tell you something about Putin. He doesn't tweet in the middle of the night. Putin doesn't tweet in the middle of the night and not think about the consequences of the next tweet. Of course he would have thought about it. He wouldn't have done that. He doesn't want the whole world turning on him after he's helped Assad beat back ISIS. I thought ISIS was our number one enemy. The Free Syrian Army? There is no such thing. The Free Syrian Army are our moderate terrorists created by the CIA and John McCain. John McCain and Lindsey Graham are the mouthpieces for this army of murderers. What is going to happen to the Christians, the Alawites, and the Jews in Syria? Have you thought that through yet? Well, you don't care, but I do care. What's going to happen to them if Assad is removed? Who will protect them? I'll talk about that today. But again, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I'm getting a little ahead of myself. I'm presenting you a lot of emotional arguments and a lot of tangential arguments. But I want to go back to my primary case against, one, that Assad did it, because I believe there's no evidence that he did, nor would it make sense for him to have done it. And number two, this is not a sarin gas attack, as the morons in the media are reporting. What do they know? What do they know? These are college dropouts who majored in journalism or poli-sci, who don't even know the difference between sarin and phosgene. Now, they'll be looking it up now for MSNBC, so the freak on MSNBC can sound smart. But listen, freako, there's a big difference between sarin and phosgene. What you saw there with the poor children choking was a choking agent, not a nerve agent. If it had been a nerve agent, the first responders would have reacted. They all would have died, as a matter of fact. So it can't be a nerve agent. The West jumped to a conclusion before there was any investigation. By the way, folks, no independent person can access the site right now. So any analysis has to be done from somewhere else. Who is in the chain of custody of soil and plant samples that will be needed to determine which chemical was used? And by the way, Turkey claims to have done an autopsy of 3 victims and said that there were chemical warfare agents used. Really? And they concluded it was Assad? By the way, there's no autopsy on earth that can tell you that it was sarin gas. You have to compare tissue samples of the deceased with the chemical composition of Assad's destroyed weapons. I know that's a lot for you to follow, all you geniuses in the media. But in order to do a proper autopsy, you have to compare tissue samples of the deceased with the chemical composition of Assad's destroyed weapons. Where might that lead? So, my friends, I presented you the initial arguments on the following issue. One, my position is that it was not Assad who gassed his own people. And number two, it was not sarin gas. It was some kind of chlorine-based gas, such as phosgene, which is a choking agent. I'll be right back on the Savage Nation. Be here or be nowhere.
Join us.
Story in a nutshell. It's another war for oil. It's all over again. It's the same thing as 1999. Remember when Bill Clinton was mercilessly bombing the Serbian people?
Yes. For the Muslims.
An article in 1999, the oily tracks run through Kosovo. It was a little noticed article. My heart was broken because Bill Clinton engaged in 78 of the worst days of my life until now, where Bill Clinton mercilessly bombed Serbia. He blew up hospitals. He blew up train stations. He blew up every bridge on the Danube River for one reason, and that was to steal Kosovo from the Serbs, to permit an oil pipeline to run through Kosovo. What's even worse about that story is the same exact elements that are now on the side of war were on the side of war then. And the same sane people and rational people who cared for the stability of the earth, for the stability of their families, were against that insane act by Bill Clinton. I have not changed my position. It's the same exact thing. We cannot let crazed businessmen who put their bottom line ahead of the survival of the planet, and I'm talking about Rex Tillerson, to rule this nation. Did you vote for Rex Tillerson?
I think it's interesting, don't you, that they showed the people dying in great detail. Do we see the people dying on the streets as the Islamic terrorists mow them down with the trucks? No, we don't see them slowly dying on camera. If we see any pictures at all, they're blurred out. But these pictures were focused on, and they took immediate action. When you see something like that, when you see it being done by somebody who has no motive, then you should start to question that official government narrative. And now we have, and this came out over the weekend, International Business Time, we have RT, we have Press TV, we have InfoWars covering what an MIT expert, a weapons expert who used to work for the Department of Defense, an MIT professor, is saying this is a fake attack. Are you seeing this anywhere in the mainstream media? No. Are you seeing it trending on Google? No. You will not see it trending there. Now, this individual is Theodore Apostle of MIT. He has worked in the past for the Department of Defense as a scientific advisor, and he focuses on the narrative of this shell. We were told, no, it couldn't have been the Russians bombing a chemical plant and then a cloud going over and taking out these people. No, we saw a crater in the middle of the street. So he says, let's take a look at this picture of this crater in the middle of the street. And here's this picture. He says, if you look at the shell, you see that it was not dropped from an airplane. The damage on the casing is inconsistent from an aerial explosion. It was also not an explosion that went from the inside out. He says it's more likely there was explosive charge was laid upon the shell that contained gas before being detonated. He said the explosive acted on the pipe as a blunt, crushing mallet, and you can see that in that picture. He said it drove the pipe into the ground while at the same time creating the crater. He said there was no competent analyst would miss the fact that the alleged sarin canister was forcefully crushed from above rather than exploded by munitions within. You understand that? You can look at that picture. The very picture that they say shows that this was something that was dropped by the airplane. He said, no, it wasn't dropped by the airplane. It was crushed on the ground. It did not blow from the inside out. It was crushed to detonate it. He says all of these highly amateurish mistakes indicate that this White House report, like the earlier Obama White House report from 2013, was not properly vetted by the intelligence community as they claimed. I have worked, he said, with the intelligence community in the past. I have grave concerns about the politicization of intelligence that seems to be occurring with more frequency in recent times. Now, this is a man who worked as a scientific advisor on the same case in 2013. We've seen this movie before. And he pointed out at that time that Assad was not responsible. The evidence did not suggest that. And that was also verified by the UN at a later date. If we could have taken time to do an investigation, that's what we would have found out.
Russia's legislature is similar to ours here in the United States. Here in the U.S., we have 100 members in our upper chamber, which is called the Senate, and we've got 435 members in our lower chamber, which is called the House of Representatives. Over in Russia, they have a parliament. It has 166 members in their upper chamber, which is called the Federation Council, and they have 450 members in their lower chamber called the State Duma. One of the members of the State Duma is a man named Mikhail Yemelyanov. He's saying that Trump's airstrike in Syria this week may lead to nuclear war with Russia. He said, quote, "This act goes far beyond just Syria because clearly Russia supports the legal Syrian government and takes part to a certain scale in this conflict. Therefore, such strikes are an act not just against Syria, but also against Russia. Moreover, when Americans were striking the airport, they didn't know if our citizens were there or not. So this situation may lead at least to a repetition of the Cuban Missile Crisis, which almost pushed the world onto the edge of a nuclear war." All right, so he also made a fair point about the chemical attack that took place in the Syrian town of Khan Sheikhoun on April 4th. This is what he said, quote, "It is all lies. There was no chemical attack by government forces. Chemical weapons were taken from Syria a long time ago, and the Americans know this, because they were transported under their control. This is an excuse for the U.S. to interfere in the Syrian conflict directly." All right, now before anyone criticizes me for listening to what a Ruski has to say on the matter, I'll tell you this. I researched his claim about the chemical weapons and found out for myself that he is exactly correct. His claims are corroborated by both the United Kingdom and the United States. On the 23rd of June in 2014, the BBC published an article titled "Last of Syria's Chemical Weapons Shipped Out." The article says this, quote, "The last of Syria's declared chemical weapons have been shipped out of the country for destruction," the international watchdog OPCW says. OPCW stands for the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, okay? So the article goes on to say this, quote, "The chemical cargo is being shipped to a specially modified U.S. naval vessel, the MV Cape Ray. The destruction of the most toxic agents will take place on board at an undisclosed location somewhere in the Mediterranean Sea. The remaining chemicals will be destroyed in Finland, the U.S., and Britain." So we have confirmation that Bashar al-Assad, the president of Syria, allowed the international community to come into Syria and take all of his chemical weapons. These weapons were then turned over to the United States, which took them aboard a U.S. Navy vessel called the MV Cape Ray. All right, let's set that aside and go to a statement by the White House. On August 18, 2014, the White House published a press release. That release was entitled "Statement by the President on the Completion of the MV Cape Ray of the Destruction of Syria's Declared Chemical Weapons." Boy, that's a long title. This is what the statement from the White House said, quote, "Today we mark an important achievement in our ongoing effort to counter the spread of weapons of mass destruction by eliminating Syria's declared chemical weapons stockpile. The most lethal declared chemical weapons possessed by the Syrian regime were destroyed by dedicated U.S. civilian and military professionals using a unique American capability aboard the MV Cape Ray, and they did so aboard the U.S. vessel several weeks ahead of schedule. This is a major milestone in the international community's efforts under the leadership of the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, OPCW, to rid the Syrian regime of its chemical weapons. It further advances our collective goal to ensure that the Assad regime cannot use its chemical arsenal against the Syrian people, and sends a clear message that the use of these abhorrent weapons has consequences and will not be tolerated by the international community. Okay, so there we have it. An official statement by the U.S. government that Syria's chemical weapons had been destroyed. And not only were the weapons themselves destroyed, but the facilities that had been used to create the weapons, those were also destroyed. If we go back to October of 2013, the Washington Post reported this, quote, "Syria has destroyed its declared chemical weapons production facilities," international inspectors said Thursday. The article also pointed out that in October of 2013, the OPCW directly inspected 21 out of Syria's 23 sites, and they were able to verify that the other 2 sites had already been abandoned and there was nothing going on. So folks, Russian or not, Mikhail Yemelyanov is absolutely right in saying that chemical weapons were taken from Syria a long time ago, that the Americans know this because they were transported under the Americans' control. The truth is, the Syrian government had absolutely zero reason to use chemical weapons this week. None. Show me one person in the world who can come up with any rational argument for why Assad decided, after all that he had already been through, to suddenly go back and attack his own people for no apparent reason with chemical weapons that the USA and the international community had already taken away from him, knowing that if he did so, he would be inviting war from the United States. Now remember how all of this started. The USA was hell-bent on invading Syria and toppling the Assad regime way back in 2013. Obama had come out with that famous red line speech saying that the USA would invade Syria if Assad used chemical weapons. And wouldn't you know it, next thing you know, there's a chemical weapons attack in Ghouta on August 21st. Despite there being zero evidence to prove that Assad had carried out the attack, the Obama administration immediately started trying to prepare for war. They said that they were not going to even need constitutional declaration of war from Congress. And at the time, Congress was actually, some of the legislators in Congress were threatening to bring impeachment hearings up against Obama if he did this without them. So Obama was definitely gunning for war. Fortunately, there was a journalist who asked Secretary of State John Kerry if there was anything at all that Assad could do to avert this coming U.S. invasion. So Kerry pompously replied this, quote, "Sure, Assad could turn over every single bit of his chemical weapons, but he isn't about to do it, and it can't be done." So after Kerry said this, what did Assad do? Assad said, "Come on in. Send your international inspectors in. Take the darn chemical weapons. We aren't using them." So that put Kerry and Obama over a barrel. It was a huge humiliation for them. So the next month, in September, the USA and Russia negotiated a deal called the Framework for Elimination of Syrian Chemical Weapons. The deal required Syria to allow international inspectors to investigate the stockpiles in Syria and to look for any kind of other chemical weapons, all of which had to be destroyed by mid-2014. And that's exactly what happened. By the way, a full investigation into that Ghouta chemical attack was done, and it was determined by the International Investigation Team that there was no evidence that proved that Assad's forces had carried out the chemical attacks. None. The investigation team published a report on their findings which said that the chemical weapons had been fired from 5 different locations around Damascus. And they put in their report that they had discovered that all 5 sites were under the control of the rebel opposition forces, not under the control of the Assad regime. The investigation team also said that the rebels were seen moving various munitions in and out of each site, suggesting that it was the rebels who had staged the chemical weapon attack to frame Assad. Let me give you a direct quote from the report. This is what they said. The 5 sites investigated by the team had been well traveled by other individuals prior to the arrival of the mission. During the time spent at these locations, individuals arrived carrying other suspected munitions, indicating that such potential evidence is being moved and possibly manipulated. I don't know about you guys, but to me, the fact that the Obama administration was racing into war with Syria based on this supposed attack, chemical weapon attack by Assad, an attack that they had no way of knowing who had committed it, whether it was Assad or his enemies. That tells me that the whole chemical weapons story back in 2013 was really just an excuse to justify war. And it should be very alarming to us all that this is exactly what is happening in 2017 under Trump. It's a repeat of the exact same scenario. Given the fact that the Trump administration knows that all of Assad's chemical weapons had been destroyed, and knowing that the last chemical weapon attack turned out to have been carried out by the rebels, not by Assad, you'd think that this time around the U.S. government would be a little more careful, a little less quick to go in guns blazing. But no, Trump struck the Syrian army with cruise missiles before any investigation could be done. They didn't send in any teams. No international teams went in to find out what happened. Plus, the Trump administration, just like Obama's administration, they are refusing to give the public any evidence so that we can judge for ourselves if Assad is guilty. And all of this craziness is being carried out with full knowledge that we are likely going to have to fight the Russians and the Iranians as well if we go in after Assad in Syria. The fact is that this is all just smoke and mirrors. It's the same pretext that was used to get us into the Iraq War back in 2003, 2004. The U.S. government told us that Saddam Hussein had these chemical weapons, that we had to invade Iraq to save the poor little children from a vicious dictator. How many times are the American people going to fall for the same exact war propaganda? These are false flag attacks. They are not being perpetrated by Assad. The American people is being manipulated with mass mind control techniques using graphic and emotionally traumatizing images of little children foaming at the mouth. They are using these images in the mainstream media to manipulate us psychologically and emotionally to get us to support and go along with another war. A war that benefits the oil corporations that want to go in and put that pipeline in through Syria, which is what this is really all about. You people who want war with Syria are stupid, weak-brained imbeciles to fall for this crap all over again. You people are a danger to America. Shame on you. You're nothing but a bunch of useful idiots who are being used like pawns in a game that you don't even know is being played. Wake up. Wake up and join the rest of us who learned after 9/11 that there is no depths to which our government will not sink to achieve its satanic one world order agenda. Wake up, America. We are on the brink of nuclear war. Get out there to your town halls, scream at these morons who represent us in Congress, and tell them that we will not allow them to drag us into World War III. They can wave the American flag and talk about patriotism and how we have to save little babies all they want. We will not be manipulated into war again. For the End Times News Report, I'm Jake Morphonios.
I'm Stephen Benoon. You're watching Israeli News Live. It is all firing up again. We told you guys on April the 3rd, just a couple of days before the U.S. government struck Syria with Tomahawk cruise missiles, 59 cruise missiles in all. As we reported this, even before the sarin gas attack that was blamed on Bashar al-Assad, that no doubt was done by the rebels, only to get justification for this airstrike to get started, and that was to help knock out some of Assad's warplanes there to prepare for a ground invasion, something we've been saying that's going to happen. We've shared that information. Some of the information we've really are indebted to our good friend Lorenzo. It already happened. His diligent efforts there to unlock the movement of the U.S. military equipment being moved into Beirut, Lebanon, as well as into Jordan's Aqaba port off the Gulf of Aqaba, right down near Eilat, Israel. Before we get into all this here, let me just remind you guys, we do need your support and help in making our broadcast possible. And we did try to make it a bit easier for you. For those of you that are having trouble donating on IsraeliNewsLive.org, our website page, you can also right here on our YouTube channel above the subscribe button here. We were able to put a little link right here. We do thank you for your kindness in making this all possible. Let's get right back into this. Very serious news. As we stated, they were putting U.S. military equipment there. And again, got to really thank Lorenzo here for doing that on Already Happened. This is his Twitter page here. Don't forget, he was the one that shared with us, and he's so kind to send a lot of this to us so we know in advance what's going on, but was showing how that the equipment was being moved, loaded up there in Romania. We have to thank President Barack Hussein Obama for being the guy that sent all this over to Europe with the intentions of taking down Syria. Believe me, it was started long ago. Here was